Mansions Hotel started out life as a residence mansion for prominent industrialist and attorney by the name of Willis McCook and his wife Mary. And Willis and Mary had 10 kids, and they had to build a place uh, big enough to house them all. He also wanted something that was pretty splendid because on Fifth Avenue in Shadyside at that time, you had many of the prominent industrialists of that time around the turn of the century, the 20th century. So Andrew Carnegie had a mansion in that vicinity, Andrew Mellon, George Westinghouse. So they really were some of the giants of Pittsburgh history, had their mansions around there. H.J. Heinz as well. And so you want to kind of keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. So he built a very, very splendid place. He started building it in 1902, and sometime after that, his oldest daughter, Bessie, had become engaged to be married. So he decided to, as a wedding present for her and her husband to be, build a mansion for them right next door. So that became the Amberson House, and the McCook Mansion became Fifth Avenue House in our hotel. They both opened, or you were occupied, around 1906. And Willis McCook, if anybody's heard of Henry Clay Frick, the Frick Building downtown, he was Andrew Carnegie's right-hand man for a long time in the steel business. He was Frick's attorney and had famously made quite a bit of money that way, but he was also a steel man in his own right. Like a lot of these grand mansions at the time, it didn't last too long as a residence. Willis McCook died in the early 1920s, and his wife Mary died in the early 1920s as well. And the family, despite the fact that it was really just a few short years after they had moved into the place, did not really have the wherewithal to keep up with it because it required servants and that kind of thing. So the amount of money to keep the place up was substantial. So the house, the main house that we call Fifth Avenue House, eventually went up for sheriff's sale in the late 1940s, and it was acquired by a family named the Bonavides at that time. Once the Bonavides acquired Fifth Avenue House at sheriff's sale, they sort of faced the same problem that the McCook family had, which was how do you keep the place up if you don't have a ton of money? So what they ended up doing was taking in students from Carnegie Mellon and from Pitt to lodge in the upper floors, and they paid a rent, and that's how they were able to keep the house up. So the family lived on the first floor, and then the students lived on the upper floors. The Bonavides had two sons that grew up in that house, and Mrs. Bonavide acted as kind of the mother hen of the facility, looking over this variety of students coming through. And apparently a lot of the students were from Carnegie Mellon's theater department and art department. And so they got some fairly well-known folks through there over the years, including Shirley Jones, who, if you're of a certain age, would remember as Mrs. Partridge in the Partridge Family. And before that, she was a big movie star in the 50s. And then George Papard, again, if you're of a certain age, you remember him from the A-Team TV show from back in the 80s. But he, again, was a famous leading man actor back in the 1960s and 70s. So those were kind of two of the sort of big names that stayed there over the years. So there's a lot of history there with regard to the rooming and the boarders. The Fifth Avenue House continued as a rooming house for Carnegie Mellon students till 2004. And what happened was in early 2004, Mrs. Bonavide had passed away due to natural causes. She was elderly. But her son had moved into what we now call Amberson House next door, and was living there with his family, and he and his wife oversaw the rooming operations there. Well, as it happens, a little bit, maybe 2 months after Mrs. Bonavita had passed away, one of the students had left a hot plate on or something similar and had um, caught his or her room on fire up on the third floor, and it caused a dreadful fire that gutted the third floor and made the house unusable. So that kind of brought its life as a rooming house for Carnegie Mellon students and Pitt students to an end, unfortunately. After the fire, the Bonavita son and his family put the houses out to market. And in 2006, a local Shadyside couple acquired both places. And their idea was to transform the both buildings into what it's become today, which is a small boutique hotel in the heart of Shadyside. And so they got to work getting the financing for that, and construction began in 2010. And Fifth Avenue House was completed in about March 2011, and then Amberson House was completed toward the end of 2012 and became open to the public at that time.